Frankel.
It's such a satisfying ending. You know, I've seen this movie an awful lot this fall, and all these deaths, you know, everybody sort of fits their character in. They had trouble figuring out how to end it. First, they had a gunfight in the cemetery they were planning out, and you know, Stanley Kramer said, "Well, wait a minute, you know, how's that going to work?" And Carl, but they came up with this thing that I think works well because everybody sort of gets something that fits them. I mean, if you think about it, the first, you know, Ben Miller, he can't help himself. He's so impetuous, and he breaks that plate glass window because he wants to get the bond and he wants to be ready for the good time they're going to have later. That's just kind of who he is, and of course that gives them all away. It gives the marshal the chance to, you know, to hide from them and come around the back. Notice the marshal doesn't, you know, just shoot them in the back. He announces that he's there, and they turn around, and you know, that's it for Ben, who's played incidentally by Sheb Woolley. I don't know if any of you, we've got people of a certain age who see Rawhide, the TV show. Well, Sheb Woolley plays the scout in Rawhide. He also was the singer in the one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Yes, that's Sheb Woolley. And like everyone else in this movie, if you notice, these folks can ride. I mean, they're all riding their own horses, and you know, when his horse rears up, that's him doing it. When Kane and Mrs. Kane are leaving town, that's them on the wagon. There's no process shots or any of that sort of phony stuff. Anyway, so he goes, and then the next one up is Colby, the Lee Van Cleef character, who has no lines in the movie, if you notice, none at all. I don't know if they were cut out or what happened. Colby is bored to death. He's the one, he's even playing his harmonica, you know, playing the theme song at the train station. He's just so bored. So of course he dashes in there to the barn because he thinks he's going to get the lawman through the floor, and that ends badly for him. And then of course Pierce gets it from Mrs. Kane, which is, I think, also incredibly satisfying. When you stop and think about it, Mrs. Kane is responsible for both of the last two deaths, right? She shoots Pierce herself, and then of course the main bad guy, you know, she pushes him away, and that's that. And it's just, and that moment where she is the one who saves her husband's life. I love these two women characters. I love the fact that they both love the marshal. They're the only two in town who really, really love him, and yet they have big conflicts with him. Helen Ramirez, because they used to be together and now they're not. But she's the only one in town who understands him, right? She says to him, "If I were you, I would leave too." And he says, "I can't." And she says, "I know." And later she tells Harv, her, you know, the unfaithful deputy, "This town is already rotting, you know, in a half hour. Kane's going to be dead and nobody cares, and this town's going to die too." She nails it. I mean, she's got it exactly right. But of course, she stays on the train. Usually, there are lots of westerns that have a sultry, dark-skinned, dark-haired woman who's, you know, spending time with the lead character, and that woman usually gets a bullet in the third act, saving the life of her boyfriend, you know, and so that the man friend can go off with the blonde white woman. In this case, Helen isn't taking a bullet for anybody, right? She's looking after herself. But Mrs. Kane, but Amy has to go back, and it's Amy in the end who saves them, and Amy has a huge conflict with him as well. But in the end, that's what happens. So I don't know. I think they did a wonderful job of creating something and of solving the problem in a way that involves all the people we care about and explains who they are. I don't know if you're going to ask questions, Barry, or do you have questions or anything? Any thoughts about this?
Well, you know, the three bad guys. You mentioned the fact that Sheb Woolley, who played Ben Miller, was responsible for writing and singing
That's
the
right.
People Eater. He had been in a handful of westerns prior to appearing in this. And he had a claim to fame. In 1951, he appeared in a movie with Gary Cooper called Distant Drums, and he played a character who was the first person to ever utter the Wilhelm scream. which if you look that up on your computer, you'll find that's had a fascinating history since 1951. And Wooly was attacked by an alligator. They were down in Florida in the swamp, and this earth shattering scream comes out of him, and it was used in umpteen movies since then. It's almost like a trademark that even appears in I think one of the Star Wars films. Lee Van Cleef was originally supposed to be the Lloyd Bridges character. He was supposed to be Harvey Pell, but he was asked initially to have a little facial adjustment. Could you have your nose fixed? And Van Cleef apparently liked his nose. He refused to have it done. So he got the part of Jack Colby, and Lloyd Bridges enters the scene as Deputy Harvey Pell. And Bob Wilkie, who plays Jim Pierce, he was originally a stuntman in films, and before High Noon, he made an appearance in 145 films. So he was definitely not a new face. He was perhaps a face that, even though he's sequestered as is Van Cleef and Sheb Woolley, low in the cast, they're definitely prominent figures in this movie, and their faces are very well represented.
Yeah, I wanted to, well, two things occur to me to mention. One is everybody in this movie is beautifully cast, it seems to me. I mean, that's the great Thomas Mitchell playing the sort of unfaithful mayor, right? I just saw, It's a Wonderful Life about a week and a half ago, and he plays Uncle Billy in that, and he's kind of, Uncle Billy's a slightly unstable but lovable character, and he's got longer hair, and and here he is playing somebody very, very different, and really someone who represents the sort of moral, in the end, stands in for the moral corruption of the community. And Harry Morgan, Lon Chaney Jr. plays the former marshal, these two wonderful women actors. I mean, everybody is good, and Cooper especially. Stanley Kramer, who was in charge of the company that made High Noon, didn't really, as I mentioned earlier, didn't really want Cooper. They thought, first of all, Cooper was 50 years old when this movie was made, and he looks older, doesn't he? I mean, he's filmed unfiltered, and he's sweaty, and you can see every line in his face. And he was an old 50. He had a hernia. He had a bad back, ulcers. He smoked, somebody chain smoked 3-4 packs of cigarettes a day, and he was kind of a mess. His life is a bit of a mess at this point too, because he's just separated from his wife of 17 years, and he's dealing with his very tempestuous, talented, beautiful 25-year-old mistress, Patricia Neal. And at the same time, the movie parts he's getting are not what they used to be. Cooper was a star for 30 years, but he was really a product of the Hollywood studio system, and he didn't write his own scripts, and he didn't direct his own movies. He needed good material, and the system, for a number of reasons, was beginning to falter then, which is why he jumped at the chance of playing this part, because he loved the script. Stanley Kramer didn't like the way Cooper played this role. Stanley was kind of his favorite actor was Spencer Tracy, and he kind of liked Marlon Brando a lot too. He liked big actors with big emotions, and Cooper is doing something very different than that here. It's very minimalist. Stanley said, and he wrote it in his memoirs, something like, I thought Cooper could have played the marshal in his sleep. In fact, there were times I thought that's just what he was doing. He didn't get it. And yet, I think Cooper, as suggested earlier, is really crucial here, because that sort of sense of vulnerability that you can see in his face and in the way he carries his shoulders. There's no big speeches here. He doesn't get a chance to emote. He doesn't need to. We know what's going on with him, and it's so right from the top to the bottom. These are, I think, a group of superb performers, and they all make it work together. Yes.
Could you say a little more about the impact of you're saying that it was the screenwriter, was it? That was,
Yes.
what was happening with this that was an effect of the being blacklisted?
The blacklist. Yeah, that's a really good question. The question was about the screenwriter Carl Foreman and the situation. So again, we're in 1951 Hollywood, and the House Un-American Activities Committee has come back to town for a second go-round and called dozens and dozens of people to testify. And actually, Carl Foreman had not been called in 47, even though they had his name then, but he was a small fish in Hollywood at that point. Nobody really knew him. He didn't have a big name. They called people. Sorry, excuse me. Must be the 21-degree weather. You know, but by 51, Carl had been nominated for an Academy Award for Champion, the Kirk Douglas boxing movie. He'd been nominated again for The Men, Marlon Brando's first movie about paraplegic war veterans in a VA hospital in Southern California. So suddenly Carl had a much bigger profile. And so he got a subpoena, but he's not the only one who was subpoenaed from this movie. That smarmy hotel clerk is Helen Chamberlain, who also was subpoenaed to testify in 51. And one of the women in the church scene is Virginia Farmer, called to testify. Lloyd Bridges, who plays the unfaithful deputy, got a subpoena in 51 and ended up testifying privately in a smaller session with an investigator and ended up naming some names of people. And so up and down, I could go on. The cameraman, you know, Floyd Crosby, who worked closely with Fred Zinnemann, the director, and I didn't mention Fred before, but you can see the sort of, there's almost a documentary feel to the way the movie looks, right? And Fred and Floyd had both worked with the great film documentarian Robert Flaherty. They looked at photographs of Matthew Brady images of the Civil War to sort of capture what they were trying to do here. Anyway, all these different folks, and Floyd Crosby, who also was not subpoenaed then, but couldn't get work afterwards. They basically, you know, the committee was going down the list, getting hold of people who they thought would be interesting witnesses to call, who they could put on the spot, and asking them to name names, and asking them, who else do you know? You actually, it was a sort of three-step process when you were called in public before the committee. They wanted you to own up to the fact that you'd been in the party and to say how sorry you were. They wanted you to praise the committee for the great work it was doing to protect the United States from communism. And then, just to prove that you were, you know, worthy of redemption, you had to name some names in public. And that was a bridge too far for Carl Foreman. I mean, he didn't want to sacrifice his wonderful career, but he really felt he couldn't name names in the end. And he knew, because the studios had adopted a policy, the major studios all had the same policy, that they adopted it actually in a meeting in 1947, that anyone who didn't cooperate with the committee, anyone who wouldn't be able to sign an oath saying they'd never been in the party and refused to cooperate, wouldn't work again. They would be blacklisted. It wasn't the committee that blacklisted you. The committee exposed you, humiliated you, put you on display in public. And incidentally, you weren't allowed to have a lawyer at these hearings. You weren't allowed to confront the people who were accusing you of being a member of the Communist Party. It was like judge, jury, and an executioner right there. And if you didn't do that, you weren't going to work again. And these folks, I mean, Helen Chamberlain didn't work again for many years. Carl Foreman took the Fifth Amendment when he appeared in September 51, very reluctantly. He said that he wasn't, and they asked him the $64 question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? His answer was, I am not one now. I took an oath to the Screenwriters Guild last year that I wasn't a member of the party or any group seeking the overthrow of the government. That oath was true then and it's true now. And of course then they asked, well, what about before 1950? And he took the Fifth Amendment, saying he wasn't going to incriminate himself. And that was fine, you know, in the sense that having taken the Fifth, they couldn't prosecute him for contempt of Congress. But at the same time, it guaranteed that essentially he was going to be fired the next day. And what happened is he and Stanley Kramer were good friends and business partners. Stanley was a good liberal Democrat, but Stanley felt he had no choice. And the day after Carl testifies, Stanley announces in the press that he has serious problems with what Carl's done, and he and the company are going to take action. And within a few weeks, they fired him. They give him a settlement, but he can't get work, and he tries to start his own little production company, and he even gets and Gary Cooper, who's a conservative Republican and a strong anti-communist. But Gary Cooper has been working with Carl and with Fred Zinnemann, and really likes what they're doing in the movie. And he tells Carl, "Go ahead and use my name when you organize this new company. I'll buy stock in it." And they talk about him being in one of the movies that Carl can make with this new company. And he does announce that. And it takes approximately 8 days for Cooper to feel he has to change his mind. Hedda Hopper and Loyola Parsons and the right-wing gossip columnists in Hollywood at the time, very powerful people, encouraged and really invited the committee to come to town. John Wayne, who's the head of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, leading anti-communist organization. John Wayne wants to know why it is that this icon of American values, Cooper, the greatest, at that point, still bigger than Wayne, I would say. They're the two really iconic Western figures. They want to know why it is that this, icon would want to go into business with an ex-commie. And at the same time, Cooper's doing one picture a year for Warner Brothers for $275,000 a year, and the people at Warner's tell Cooper's lawyer that this is going to be a problem if he goes into business. So 8 days after they announce that Cooper's going to be part of this, Cooper's gone off to Idaho to go hunting and fishing with his good pal Ernest Hemingway. He phones Hedda Hopper and reads a statement to her essentially saying that he still believes in Carl Foreman's Americanism and ideals and talent as a picture maker, but because of all the reaction to him being part of this, he's decided to step away. And Carl can't work in Hollywood after that, and eventually he leaves. John Wayne meets with him, has a private meeting with him, and tries to convince him to go back to the committee and name names. We need guys like you. Wayne believes in redemption. But Carl can't do it. He won't do it. He ends up in London. He stays there for 25 years. He's under the illusion that he's going to be able to work in London under his own name. But most of the British film industry is either owned or financed by American studios, and so the same strictures apply there as well. He writes scripts under pseudonyms for 7 or 8 years. Most famous of those, a script he wrote with a fellow black